Sometimes, despite the quality of a movie being fairly decent, audiences just don't connect with it, and as a result, it loses the studio a lot of money. Today, I'm going to be talking about 10 movies that I think are great, but bombed at the box office. This is by no means a ranking, this is just sorted by their release date. First one is Titan AE. This is a film from Don Bluth, who brought us some very cherished animated films, such as Land Before Time and Secret of NIMH. But Don Bluth has also made some mistakes, such as Troll in Central Park and Rockadoodle, which weren't quite as successful or acclaimed. And in 2000, after these films kind of lost his audience, he puts out Titan AE, which even today is a very unique sci-fi film. It's a future where humans have had to leave Earth, and have explored so much of space and discovered all these different alien species that, compared to them, we're not as advanced. And as a result, we experience prejudice against us. We're thought of as one of the lowest life forms in the galaxy. The movie also has a great cast behind it. It's got Matt Damon, Drew Barrymore, Nathan Blaine, all these great cast members. And the reason I think this bombed is because of the budget. The film did something that was very unique at the time, where it blended 2D animation with 3D animation, and for the most part, it looks very well done. But there are certain scenes where it does look a bit off, and animation is already pretty expensive, so to mix two different styles costs a lot more. The budget was somewhere between 75 to 90 million, and it only made 36 million. It lost the studio around $100 million if you factor in marketing, and the animation studio behind it was actually shut down just 10 days after the film opened. The Rotten Tomatoes score is 50%, with the audience score not being much better, only being a 61%. The movie bombed so hard that Don Bluth hasn't made a movie in almost 25 years, which is a shame that this is a huge blot on his resume. Because again, this is the guy who did Live Before Time, which is absolutely cherished. I don't know why people don't really resonate with this movie. If you haven't seen it, go watch it and let me know what you thought. If you haven't seen it, let me know your thoughts. Next up is Treasure Planet. This bombed for many of the same reasons as Titan AE. It's also a sci-fi movie that blends 2D and 3D animation. The film's budget was 140 million. It was actually the most expensive 2D animated film ever made, and it only made 109 million. I think the problem with it isn't the quality of the film, because again, over time, a lot more people have discovered this film and love it. I think the film was just poor timing of its release date. Disney wanted a big Thanksgiving family movie, but it opened a week after Harry Potter and the Chamber of Secrets, which was a much bigger film. The Rotten Tomatoes score for this one is 70%, which is still fresh, but not great. And the audience score is 72%, which again, ain't much better. Again, I don't know what's up with people not discovering this film. Cowboys and Aliens. I think the reason this bombed, grossing only 174 million against 163 million budget, is because of Iron Man 2. A lot of people, I think, lost faith in Jon Favreau because Iron Man 2, while it was successful, wasn't very well received because of how overstuffed it was. On top of that, it also opened against Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows Part 2, which was the last Harry Potter film and was huge. It also competed with Captain America the First Avenger, which was the last film leading up to the first Avengers movie. I think it just had the unfortunate luck of opening between two very big movies, and also a movie that, compared to Harry Potter and Marvel, was not a big franchise movie that had a lot of name recognition behind it, despite starring Harrison Ford and Daniel Craig. Critics didn't resonate with this movie, as it only has a 44% on Rotten Tomatoes and a 43% audience score. And I don't know why, because I think it's great. Tomorrowland. This was a movie for Brad Bird, and it had a budget of 190 million, and it only grossed 209 million. Again, I think the film was just box office cannibalization. It opened against Avengers: Age of Ultron, which was a much bigger film, and the marketing was also pretty vague on what the movie was actually about. And the Rotten Tomatoes score for both critics and audiences is exactly 50% for both. So, a very divisive film. People either like it or they don't. Everybody is very split down the middle. Personally, I thought this film was very creative, and it harkened back to the 50s sci-fi aesthetic of Brad Bird's Iron Giant. I think it had a good message, and it managed to do a different take on a sci-fi dystopia story. Now, some people found it too heavy-handed. I think it was fine. The Man from U.N.C.L.E., Guy Ritchie's spy film based on the 1960s show with the same name. The film had a 75 million budget and only grossed 110 million. The critic audience reception for this one actually wasn't too shabby. It has a 68% critic score and a 73% audience score, both of which are technically fresh, but they're not great. And I think the reason this bombed is it came out just a few weeks after another spy movie, Mission Impossible Rogue Nation, which Mission Impossible, a well-established franchise, or Man from Uncle, movie based on the TV show from the 60s. Which one is going to have more brand recognition? And yes, I am fully aware that Mission Impossible is also based on a TV show from the 60s, but the Mission Impossible franchise had already been well established by this point, as Rogue Nation is the fifth film in the series, whereas for Man and Uncle, this was the first movie. I think this movie has a charismatic cast, a great soundtrack, a witty script, and it didn't deserve to bomb. Valerian and the City of a Thousand Planets. Oh man, this one bombed hard, and I'm very sad that it did. This movie bombed so hard, where I live, it was only in the first run theaters for a month, and then it went to the discount theater. I left this movie absolutely enthralled with it. I thought it was visually impressive with a great story. I think I'm the only one that likes this movie, though. As on Rotten Tomatoes, it only has 47% critic score and 53% audience score. It had a budget of 180 million and only grossed 225 million. I think the huge problem with it was the trailers didn't really say anything about what the plot is. It just showed off some cool visuals and action, but it didn't really say anything about the story, so audiences didn't really have any incentive to go see it. I chalk this one up to just straight up bad marketing, despite the film actually being pretty fantastic. Solo, a Star Wars story. The reason this bombed is because it opened only 5 months after Star Wars The Last Jedi, which was a highly divisive film. On top of that, it opened the same month as Avengers Infinity War and Deadpool 2. Last Jedi leaves a bad taste in a lot of fans' mouths. It's only 5 months after that movie, and it opens against two very huge Marvel movies. Critics and audiences were very mixed on this film, as the Rotten Tomatoes score for critics is 70%, and the audience score is 63%. Now, I'm not sure how much of that is actual legitimate criticism, and how much of that is people taking out their frustrations with Last Jedi out on this film, but as for me, I think this movie is a ton of fun. It's not as good as Rogue One, but for a Han Solo movie, it's what I would expect. I think it's got fun action sequences, a fun story, all that Aaron Rank does a great job portraying young Han Solo. Daniel Glover did a great job as young Lando. I think probably just should have waited to release this movie around Christmas or later. I think the problem is Chris Miller and Phil Lord were originally hired to direct this film, but that even though the film was almost done, they were let go because it didn't line up with the studio's vision. So they bring in Ron Howard to finish the film. And I think a lot of the production troubles are what killed this movie. It's very much a Joss Whedon, Zack Snyder Justice League situation. The film had a budget of 275 million and it only made 392 million. Sad, but I do find it appropriate that the Han Solo movie is the one that couldn't break even. I just don't have it with me. Alita Battle Angel. I think ultimately this film was set up for failure because it opened in February, which is not a big blockbuster month. I barely remember seeing any marketing for this movie, and what little marketing there was didn't really do a good job on selling most people on the film. On top of that, the Rotten Tomatoes score is 61%, but when it opened, it was much lower. It was only 36%, which is abysmal. The score is much, much higher at 91%, which is fantastic, but I think a lot of that is due to over time this movie gaining a bit of a cult following. What it's really talked about this movie. Their issue is this movie came out around the time of the Disney and Fox merger, and since this wasn't a big franchise movie like X-Men or Avatar, they didn't really know what to do with it. It had a budget of 170 million and it made 404 million, which sounds great, but you realize it would have needed around 500 million to be considered a success. So it's just barely below the success threshold, which is a shame because I want to sequel to this movie so bad. And since it's kind of faded out of the cultural zeitgeist, I don't think it will happen. Especially because James Cameron is almost 80 years old and is sticking with making sequels to Avatar. The Flash. We all know why this movie bombed. Ezra Miller's rap sheet, the DCU is being rebooted. People didn't really have a reason to care about this movie. Fair enough, but I think this was a very good movie. I liked the story and main character and his goal. I like seeing Michael Keaton as Batman again, and this film was an absolute love letter to DC fans. There are so many Easter eggs and references, some well known, some obscure, and you can tell a lot of passion and love was put into this. I think it's just the behind the scenes drama that killed this film. I think if they had recast Ezra Miller and not announced a few weeks prior to the movie opening that they were starting over with Superman Legacy, it probably would have been a smash hit. Critics didn't really care for this film, and it has a 63%, but the score is 83%, which for the DCEU and its track record is pretty phenomenal. I think it's just a case of a teacher punishing the whole class for something one student did. Finally, we have The Marvels. I'm a fan of the first Captain Marvel movie, and I was pretty mixed on the Ms. Marvel TV show, so I was pleasantly surprised by how much I loved this film. I think it was a much needed breath of fresh air for the MCU with how wacky this film could get. And I think the reason it bombed, grossing 206 million on a budget of 274 million, is two reasons. One, superhero fatigue. 2023 was a year that gave us Ant-Man 3, which also bombed, Guardians of the Galaxy 3, Spider-Verse 2, and The Flash. And then we also had Secret Invasion on Disney Plus, which really dropped the ball on the finale, and it also opened on the same day as the season 2 finale of Loki. On top of that, not everyone has Disney Plus, and you need to have watched Ms. Marvel and WandaVision to understand the movie, as well as lukewarm reception to the first Captain Marvel movie. A lot of people simply did not care about this film because it's a sequel to a film where they didn't like the first one. Critics were unnecessarily harsh on this one, as it only has a 62% critic score. But the score is 82%. But I think the critic score is also another factor of what killed it. Go ahead and share what box office bombs you think deserve to make more money, or box office bombs that you love, and I will see you next time.